Well, we're on lesson 62 that has to do with Japan. So, do you know where Japan is? Well, if you get your globe and look almost on the other side of the globe, you'll see an island called Japan. Well, if you take your finger and go across from California, across the Pacific Ocean there, you'll probably run into Japan before you get to Russia. That's where Japan is. Well, I didn't really know that much about Japan until we had a Japanese exchange student that came for like 3 weeks. And Saki was his name, but he didn't speak any English. And so I had to act everything out, which was kind of hard. Have you ever done that? Like, would you like to go skiing with us? Or would you like to play basketball? Or baseball? Or would you like to go for a drive? He would smile at me, and we tried to get along in our family, and he was fitting in as best he could without speaking our language. He also gave me this gift, but I wasn't really sure what it is. So maybe you can help me and we'll look it up sometime to see what kind of thing it is. But it looks very intricate, and I put it on my shelf. He also gave us some kind of dried fruit. It was pear, but it tasted like fish, like it was dried with fish. Well, he gave first to my husband, and my husband to put it in his mouth. Okay, look already good, Saki. And he said, maybe you should give one to my son Corey. And gave one to Corey, and Corey ran. Said, okay, but he ran to the bathroom. And then I took one. I'm like, oh yeah, quite. I've never tasted a fishy pear before, but that's what he gave us, and he was smiling, so he knew that we didn't like it too well. We took him to church, and he was clapping and worshiping. I just hope that the Holy Spirit touched his heart while he was here. I'm sure he did, because God can go through languages. We know that. Well, let's talk about Japan. Japan is 1,500 miles off the coast of Asia, but it's only 31 miles from the Russian island of Sakhalin, right there. So it's pretty close to Russia then. It's 124 miles from the Korean peninsula. What size is it? It's 146,000 square miles, which sounds like a lot, but it really is smaller than the state of Montana. So it's pretty small. Also, it's made up of 4,000 islands, but 95% of the people only live on the 4 large islands. And let me give you a picture of those 4 large islands. You see that? There they are. What are their names? We got Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu. So you can see where they are. The biggest island is Honshu, and that's where most of the people live too. So when you think of Japan, you think of 4 islands. Well, about Honshu. Honshu has mountains, high mountains. In fact, they have mountains so high they call them the Japanese Alps. And then Mount Fuji, which is a volcano, they also have 200 volcanoes, and 60 of those are active volcanoes. But Mount Fuji is the highest of the mountain there. They also get a lot of earthquakes. In fact, they get 1,000 earthquakes every year. Most of them are pretty small, but sometimes they'll get a big, huge earthquake. In fact, we know they get tsunamis that are made by the earthquake. They're in what's called the Ring of Fire that goes around the whole world. Maybe we'll talk about that later. But, they're used to having big earthquakes and big tsunamis. In March of 2011, they had one of the biggest tsunamis that was ever recorded, and yet they have pictures of it coming in and devastating Japan. It's a terrible tsunami. A tsunami is this huge wave that comes in after an earthquake. They have storms and typhoons in the summer, and they have a lot of different wildlife that we're not used to. They have a snow monkey. You can see those pictures in your book. And they have lots of different fish. Well, a lot of fish that we're kind of used to too, like whales and dolphins and salmon and tuna and sardines and trout and cod, all those things they have. Of course, they're right there in the ocean. They have 600 species of birds that migrate through there too. And some of the plants there and the beautiful flowers are pretty magnificent there. They have very, very populated areas. You know, Tokyo we know is very populated. But we need to get into Japanese history because that's what we're going to be talking about, history. And then we'll spend some time on another video, and I'll be talking about their religion more. But we're going to focus on their history. Well, much of their history is influenced by, who do you think? What country do you think? China. China. They have a similar language, they have a similar culture, and art. Their art's similar, and even their religion. And a lot of times they would pay tribute even to the Chinese government. So they're pretty close knit in there with China. During the first century, if we look at the first century, that's kind of the time we're going to go from the first century after Jesus lived. There were 100 small isolated clans, and they all had many different gods and even different types of religious activities that were just for their little group or their clan. But in 200 AD, they had the Yamato clan, and this clan was actually very, very wealthy, and it was dominating on the island of Honshu. And they thought they were descended from some kind of a sun goddess. And so the family pretty much ran the people back then in this clan. They fought with bows and arrows and swords. They found large temples with this clan. And these temples, in the temples, they found pottery, jewelry, figurines, armor, weapons. They also knew a little bit about Confucius, and Confucius was mainly Chinese, so they still were very, very into the Chinese lifestyle too. So what happens then, 500 AD, the Japanese government becomes unstable, and the Yamato breakdown of the dynasty, and another dynasty happens. Let's see, I have this dynasty here. There it is. The Saga dynasty. So, and this Saga dynasty was very important. You see the year 587 AD because they had an empress that was running this huge dynasty that took over. And this empress was called, find her here, kind of got these cards mixed up, Empress Suiko of Saga, and she was the empress. Well, she didn't really run the whole Japan, their whole government, and her whole clan. Her clan probably run, but she was the empress. But she had to have somebody do the work for her. She was just like the head of everything, but she didn't run the country. And so she had a guy named Tahashi. Tahashi was very famous. When it comes to Japan, very famous. In 593, Tahashi helped the empress run the country of Japan. He was called the crown prince, or the regent, which means that he did the work, and he put the government together, and he actually ran the country. He had huge influence. He resumed closer contact with China and respected the Chinese very much. He brought Chinese arts and crafts in, and a Chinese calendar. He also decided not just to have people work for him by, by what clan they were in, but by merit, how good they worked. So he'd pick out certain people to work, and there'd be like 12 different ranks, and they'd all have different color caps, and they would come in to help him. He also built many roads, which in Japan they didn't have roads. Remember, they were kind of isolated. And he never became emperor. And the instability of his clan when they first came with the instability was after his death. So as long as he was alive, the whole government was pretty stable. He also put together a constitution with the ideas of Confucius, and he promoted Buddhism, built temples. In fact, the oldest surviving wooden building in the world is there in Japan during Tadashi's rule. Wow. So then, as time went on, we had another emperor. And this emperor was named, if I can pronounce his name right, Nakwano. Nakwaniye. Kind of flubbed that one up. But that emperor, you can see how he spells his name. Nakonona. Nakonona, that's his name. Sorry, I had a hard time with that one. So, suddenly under him, individuals could no longer own any land because the emperor owned it. They had to pay taxes to the emperor, and he assigned the people to the land who he wanted to have certain land. He took census and had complete control over the people. They all had to appeal to the emperor for everything. Then in 710, there was another Nara, Emperor Shamu in 710. And this emperor reigned actually from 724 to 756. But the Nara period was the city of Nara took over. And Buddhism became the state religion. And he put together a nunnery for the nuns and the Buddhist monks and a monastery. So he really focused on Buddhism. In fact, he built this big statue of Buddha. It's 53 feet tall. It's 500 tons of bronze and gold. Quite a deal. Well, there's a lot more history to Japan, but that's kind of a basic with the clans. And I don't know if you're going to remember all of the names, but you'll know how Japan was very related to China, and during certain periods of time how the emperors took over and how they ruled. We're also going to be talking about their religion, starting with the Shinto religion onto Buddhism, and why they would ever take Buddhism. And when you present Buddhism against Christianity, Buddhism looks pretty ugly. But now we know in Japan there have been a lot of Christians, but only recently in the last 100 years. Well, we'll get into that when we study later Japan. But anyway, so Japan. Someday maybe you'll be able to go to Japan. But we sure have a lot of good Japanese food here, don't we? I love to go to Japanese restaurants, don't you?